Vandaag heb ik een gesprek met Hillel Schwartz. Hij is een culturele historicus. Hij is de auteur van een boek, Centuries End, wat intussen al in 5 talen vertaald is. Ik ga verder met het interview in het Engels, voor zover dat lukt. Hillel, you are the author of a book, Centuries End, which is, as I just said, translated in 5 languages up to now. There something started. You focused on patterns of expectation and anxieties, which you looked back to the 990s to the 1990s, something like that, on what was going on at centuries' ends. You were then asked by a person, Gerald Barney from the Millennium Institute, to bring this into practical form.
Yes, the book itself tries to trace how, not only in Western Christian culture, but also in Islam and Jewish culture, the expectation of some change at the turn of a century is also accompanied by anxieties about the nature of that change, and also anxieties about whether or not one has prepared the future adequately for the next generations.
Yes.
Given that set of anxieties and expectations, the Millennium Institute, which works on issues of sustainable living for the future and which has prepared a computer simulation model that national planners use in order to figure out what the consequences will be for future generations of a series of investments now, called upon me to give them a context in which to understand not only the name of their institute, the Millennium Institute, but also a way of understanding how it might be possible to move people to begin projects that have long-term beneficial consequences for their different communities.
You established with them Millennium Roundtable. They started around 1993, and it was looking for groups who were already doing something with these, who were willing to do something with this metaphor of a change.
Yes, we wanted to bring together groups that had already begun to use the year 2000 or the millennium as a symbol for bringing people together around their particular long-term ambitions toward a sustainable future. We also wanted to discuss with them what would be the best ways to engage more and more of the populations that they ordinarily dealt with, as well as ones we had not yet come into contact with, in order to make some sense of the millennium as not only a celebration or a set of fireworks, but also as an observance of a threshold, a moment at which people begin to make the necessary changes for a society that will still be healthy for the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren.
That was probably quite a new approach.
The communities that people serve have often been responsive to the anniversary of that community's organization, the anniversary of the Red Cross, the anniversary of the YMCA. But this was a global anniversary, so in fact people began to see how important that this could become if framed in the proper context, and my responsibility was to help make that framing intelligible and appealing.
So I heard also from you that you one of the concepts that you tried to bring this across was with Millennium Gifts.
Yes, after we had brought the groups together and tried to establish some loosely formed alliance of groups, all of whom wanted to use the turn of the millennium as a prompt for social change, we also thought it would be necessary to demonstrate to people on the street what kind of actions could be seen to be proper for such an important anniversary moment as the millennium. So we conceived of the notion of a millennium gift, which is a gift that is not just given once and not just given in the form of financial help, but a gift which seeks to establish a pattern of attitudes that will be the basis on which we can build a sustainable society in the future. That would be attitudes that link the generations instead of dividing them against each other, attitudes that regard the world in a systemic way rather than as separate categories of problems, and third, attitudes that make every effort to indicate that all of the problems we have in front of us must be solved equitably, must be solved peacefully, must be solved with a sense of the necessary cultural distinctions that we all experience in daily life.
Yes. So it's enhancing the cultural context of the group, but also bringing it in a broader context,
and giving people a sense that there is a traditional habit of giving gifts at significant turning points in one's life, whether that is puberty or marriage or another later anniversary or graduation, and that gifts would be most appropriate at this time, but not gifts which establish the pride of place of the giver. Rather, gifts that are given with serious thought to people one may never in one's life ever see. The great-grandchildren. Gifts, in other words, that go around the corner. Gifts that you never are quite sure will be exactly taken the way you gave them, but will always be for the benefit of future generations.
Could you give an example for this?
Well, let's give a very small example, because gifts don't have to be large. They don't have to be billion-dollar gifts. One example would be, for example, a program in Colorado where there is a woman named Germaine Deitch teaching seniors, elders, how to tell the stories of their lives. And then they go into schools and become the resident storytellers, telling not only about their own lives, but the lives of their people, their legends. And then they go and become the resident storytellers in museums and national parks. But meanwhile, they've also been taught to listen, so that the young can come and tell them their stories. This exchange of the generations is very vital. Another example of a millennium gift would be what's happening now among youth around the world. They are creating youth parliaments where they are writing up the charters of what they see they need, we all need, for the future. And these charters are going to be not only visionary statements from the youth as young as 8 years old, but they are also going to be the plans of action for youth to take upon themselves in the next several decades. These are truly millennium gifts.
These are really, truly millennium gifts, and nothing involved with a lot of costs, and so it's wonderful.
Right, but now there is one which is astonishing because it is involved with a lot of cost, and even so we think we have a good chance at making it happen. And this is associated with the Jubilee movement that was started by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the bishops in the Anglican Church in England, but has since spread beyond that religious community to the widely secular community. And this is the movement to get the major debtor countries to have all of their debts released, forgiven by the World Bank, by Citicorp, by the IMF, by the national lending organizations of the major Western industrial countries. This would be a Jubilee debt release program to allow most of the external debt of these countries, which is such a burden because they will never, ever be able to pay off the capital, and all they do is pay the interest, get this removed so that they can move on themselves to making their own societies viable.
Yes, that's
That would be an astonishing millennium gift.
That would be one of the good turns of the century.
It would probably be the largest gift ever given by humankind, ever in the history, in terms of financial gifts.
Yes. Yes. That's amazing, yes. So you were also involved in that?
I've been promoting it, but I have not been involved at the start of it. What I was doing was I was invited by the White House, by the First Lady, to help define for her what a millennium gift would be. And in the process of that conversation, I think we started what would eventually become the White House Millennium Council in 1998. And that has, as part of its premises, legacies and millennium gifts that would mean something to the next generations. And the White House Millennium Council, to which I'm an unofficial advisor, has also decided, like the French and the English Millennium Commissions, to make it clear that the millennium is not just one moment, but it's more than a year. It's an era from 1998 through 2001 for both the English, the French, and the American Millennium Commissions, and also for Norway and about 25 other national Millennium Commissions.
So that brings us to the conclusion that it's not so important that it's January 1st or December 31st in a few weeks now. But it's more the concept behind it. It's more an attitude.
Yes, and although we will have, no matter what the controversy decides about whether it's January 1st of 2000 or 2001 that starts the new century and the new millennium.
Big question.
Yeah,
yes.
well, it's not a big question. It's a very minor question that started with a debate in the 1690s between German philosophers.
Oh, that's nice.
And it doesn't matter at all because we're going to have a celebration on both of those years. And
fantastic.
But what I suggest is that people begin using the year 2000 as a number that generates a certain kind of enthusiasm about working for the future generations. And I also suggest that if you're serious, then begin working 2,000 seconds a day on behalf of the future. 2,000 seconds a day is a little over half an hour. If you do half an hour every day for your community, for your region, something significant will happen after a year. But even better than that, you will have a habit of doing that, which will continue into the future.
So then we also have the year of peace and cooperation.
The United Nations
year.
The
United Nations year. And just recently, even the day, the 1st January 2000 is declared by the United Nations as a day of peace. And we have the decennium of the culture of peace and I don't recall it exactly.
Yes, for the building of peace. Yes.
For the building of peace, you could tell.
This is so yes.
We are backed also by the world community.
Yes, and there are many organizations which are just now developing to see if, as citizens, we can promote a culture of peace and at the same time empower ourselves to make changes. So the Foundation for the Progress of Humankind in Paris has been encouraging another kind of alliance all around the world to give people a sense that in their own regions they may create their own non-official, non-hierarchical, but very expressive and imaginative set of institutions similar to UN institutions, but working on the citizens level in the most democratic of ways. And this will probably end up having a big colloquium in India in 2001. We also have the Millennium People's Assembly Network, which is trying to establish a correlative to the United Nations, and that will bring almost all the NGOs together in the late summer of the year 2000. And beyond that, we have as well an emphasis in the schools and through the internet on collaborations that will be the first attempt to give us a new vision for the 21st century other than the one that we all have now, which is post-apocalyptic. If you think about it, for the 21st century, the only images we have are post-apocalyptic images. Yes. And even Mary Shelley, when she wrote about 2099, she got beyond 2000, fortunately. She got to 2099.
Yes.
Even then, 2099 was the date when the last man on earth stood on the top of the crumbling pyramid. So we need some new images for the 21st century. Right. And probably the most interesting of all of the projects so far to give us some new images came out of Haarlem in the Netherlands from the Stichting Millennium, the Millennium Foundation there, put together by 5 people who, since 1988, have been sponsoring a competition in a school of photography in Haarlem. When the final year comes around and the students must do their final exams, one of the final exams questions has always been, since 1988, photograph the future. And in 1988, 89, 90, 91, all the winning photographs, and all the photographs were dark, bleak, empty, horizonless, completely skeletal worlds. But by 1994, the winning as well as other photographs of the future began to show greenery, began to show fields, began to show pregnant women and children. And this entire album of the photographs is going to be produced as the last effort of Stichting Millennium sometime at the end of this year. So you'll be able to see the progression so that people are willing to photograph a future which actually has some substance to it and is not post-apocalyptic.
So you could speak from a mind shift.
Yes. That's not even one encouraged by the Millennium.
No.
They just said, photograph the future.
Yes. So there is something definitely going on in society, and we have to encourage it and also show it, and get inspired by it.
Yes. And of course, I would like people to reflect about it too. It's not as if we know what we want to do. It's not as if we know what the best options are now. We need some invention. We need some reflection. We need some painstaking work. And we also need some care, because the basic issue is, how are we going to match, at this turn of the millennium, the carrying capacity of the earth with the caring capacity of humankind?
That's a wonderful statement, I must say. You said something about what you could imagine is transient communities. Could you a little bit explore on this?
It comes also out of my own impatience with an absence of clear, positive visions for the future. Now, I'm not rosy-eyed. I think there are many problems in the world that we are going to have great difficulty solving, the most problematic of which is water. Right.
Yes.
Especially in the Netherlands.
Also, yeah.
But we need people who can and will go beyond the notion that the best humanity can do is rebound back to where it was before, which is what resilience is. And as an historian, I know that we have very strange ideas of where we were before. Very often these are nostalgic or sentimental ideas of where we were before that we would like to rebound back to. Well, you can't rebound back to the past.
No.
So I have been asking people rather to think in terms of transience. Transience is a word that comes from chemistry and physics, and it refers to a leap, a change of state, a sudden change of state. I don't think that there's going to be a sudden transformation in the year 2000. But if people cannot at least think that there's a way of going beyond what they ordinarily conceive as the possible, then we are going to have a very dreary future.
It would be important that people get inspired by, and then also are able to contribute, because then they become part of it. this is one of the critical things. I think that people become part of a positive future, because negative we hear everywhere, but I rather wouldn't like to focus on that.
Or live in that world.
Also, that's the other point.
Well, clearly, people become paralyzed when they hear not only about all that's going wrong, but about how hard it is to fix it, even on the smallest of levels. So one of my roles is to show people that things are being done successfully around the world, in smaller communities and in regions that do have long-term positive impact. And so to encourage people to say to themselves, well, if they can do that there, I can do something similar here, and it will work. And if I keep working, then something larger will happen that will also work. So the problem is not that there are no inspiring or imaginative projects out there. The problem is that people often discount their own abilities to make it happen in their own environment.
One of your activities is with the website. You have a wonderful website, I know about, or at least you are involved with a wonderful website where you collected all different attempts for celebrations for the millenniumworld.org, and I allowed myself to take this website to show it on my web pages too, and I think this is a place where people who are not knowing what possibilities are, they can browse through some 120, 150 different projects all over the world.
This is a project which is a combined effort of the White House and the Millennium Institute, and it is not designed to list all of the celebrations per se, but those celebrations which are linked to or inspire projects that mean to last well beyond the fireworks. So these are specifically the projects that are not the parties,
right,
not the beer festivals. Right. These are not even the year's end concerts. These are the projects which have in mind some series of events which will make a difference in 2004 or 2012 or 2028. Yes. Because from the perspective of an historian and from the perspective of Century's End, the book, I can show that we have no year beyond 2000 and 2001 which will have the aura around it. None, not a single year beyond. And so children in the year 2072 will still ask their grandparents and great-grandparents, what did they do in the year 2000? They won't care what you did in 1997 or 2012 or 2037. They'll want to know what you did in 2000, because there won't be any number they'll be looking toward at all. And if you tell them, well, I watched something on TV, this is going to be completely trivial to them. And if you tell them, well, I took this very seriously, I took all of my money out of the bank, and I bought a ticket on a cruise ship so I could cross the international date line 16 times and celebrate the millennium 16 times, well, they'll think this is just a waste of their inheritance. But if you say, I began doing something around the turn of the millennium, 2,000 seconds a day, and for that purpose I continued on, and this is the only way that you can be standing here asking me this question at all. Otherwise you couldn't be breathing, because there'd be no good air. Otherwise you wouldn't have any food to eat or water to drink that was pure enough to drink. So that would make more sense to them. And if you could point to a forest or a river, that would be good, or a great museum, that would be good too. And so the question is not to limit people in their choices of what they want to do, but to have them always thinking about that question. From their great-grandchildren in 2072, what did you do in the year 2000?
So, yes, we have a lot of celebrations are turned down now, but in this light it doesn't matter.
No, and also the Y2K problem itself can be rethought. If there's going to be a millennium bug, well, why not let that millennium bug inspire us to realize how we are so invisibly connected throughout so many parts of our lives and organize around it. If you're going to have emergency food and clothing and blankets and supplies, then that's a way of bringing your community together in the first place. I don't have to talk about that too much in Southern California because we're all prepared for earthquakes anyway. But for most of the other parts of the world, getting people together and saying, here's how we need to know what our local resources are, you can go one step farther and say, well, who's our local nurse? Who's our first aid person? Who's going to tell us the stories when the lights are out? Who's going to play us the music when we have no radios and phonographs to play if the electricity goes out? And then you begin to understand how the fabric of your community is woven together.
Yes.
Then the Y2K problem, which is a very strange phenomenon. It's not about the millennium at all. It's about computers refusing to enter the new millennium.
Yes. Yeah. You also told me about what was the background of the glitch, the computer glitch, because.
Yes, well, the computer programmers wanted to put in all 4 digits of the 20th century year. And the computer program managers, the business decisions were made on the basis of a short-term memory. That is twofold. That is, the memory inside the computers was so expensive in the middle of the 1970s that they didn't want to add in 2 digits, the first 2 digits, 19, because that might add more expense to the entire computer. The second was the short-term memory of the computer managers themselves, who didn't think that computers would be, the same computers would still be around in the end of the 20th century. What really is happening now is that people are only seeing this computer problem as a technical glitch, which has to be solved by technical people. But since it was technical people who got us into this problem in the first place, what we really have to realize is that this is an ecological lesson, showing us that just as water sources link us all, through sewage as well as drinking water, also the computer problem links us all, and all of major humanities problems are going to be systemic from now on. Which leads to another proposal I keep making to people, which is, if you're going to be educated for the 21st century, you can't be educated in just one discipline. Because all of the problems we're going to face have to be solved in an interdisciplinary way, which means you've got to become accustomed to explaining what you know as an expert to people who aren't experts. You've got to become accustomed to listening to people who are telling you something you don't know in a field you're not aware of. And you've got to be able to exchange opinions and advice in order to figure out how to solve almost all the serious problems we will face.
So that I would say it's a good start for the new millennium.
Just a simple beginning.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much for your interview.
You're welcome.
For your talk.